Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, James. How are you?
I'm fabulous. Thank you very much. What are we talking about today then?
Well, today we have got a fascinating subject to talk about, which impacts every one of us. We are talking about midlife career choices, and we are joined by a coach and expert in this field, Jess Spiers, and Jess is going to talk to us about how you can think about and approach those big career crossroads that you all face at some points.
This is midlife career crises, not just the midlife
Not on
crisis.
midlife
for
crisis.
self.
We can talk about midlife crisis, James.
Yeah, we've had a
Jess
couple
will
of
talk
those.
about career aspects of it.
So what have you been doing then? What have you been up to?
Well, I am a bit downcast today because Nottingham Forest's charge for Champions League football sort of more or less ended in a whimper yesterday. But it's an interesting one because Forest actually have qualified for European football. So they've exceeded expectations massively. Because you thought you could get a little bit more, you're almost disappointed by something that if somebody had told us 6 months ago we would have been delighted. It was impossible. The human psyche, like I say, it's the hope that kills you. Anyhow, what have you been up? What have you been up to?
You can tell both Jess and I are riveted by the tumbleweed.
Yeah, it's just like
Listen to
no
it.
interest in football whatsoever.
Nothing at all. No. Well, you got off very lucky this week. There is, for those of you who don't know, there's a very good jazz club in Nottingham called Peggy Skylight, which if you're a jazz fan, you should go to. And I bought
Good and
tickets.
jazz in the same sentence,
Well,
James.
exactly.
Never works for me.
I bought 4 tickets to go to this jazz club on Saturday nights. I was going to take my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law, rather than going to the jazz club, pulled a sickie and terribly ill, lost half a stone apparently. So that's
Really?
his way out of it. Yeah. But so then I had 2 free tickets for this jazz club. And I thought, who the hell do I know would really like to go to the jazz club? Yeah. Unfortunately for you, so my neighbour put his hand up, mate. I didn't have to phone.
Excellent, sensible move. My phone didn't ring. I am happy with that. I admire your brother-in-law for the fact that he dislikes jazz as much as me because he was willing to lose all that weight and get ill to avoid it. Fair play to him.
Yeah. Right then. First of all then, Jess, how about you introduce yourself? That'll be a good place to start.
Hello, thanks for having me on today. Yeah, so I'm Jess Spiers. I noticed you said Spears, Jimmy. Everybody says, everyone does it. I used to do the same to my husband before I knew him properly and knew how to pronounce it, but there we go. Everyone does it. Yeah, so I am a career coach, and that is quite a recent thing for me, relatively anyway, in the last few years. Just my background briefly. So I spent the first 20 years of my career in digital content. So creating podcasts and blogs and website content, writing, editing, that kind of thing. And I really enjoyed it. And, I think I was good at it, but I always had the sense like, is there more? Like, I feel like I haven't quite achieved my potential. But I literally have no idea what else I'd be good at because this is kind of all I've ever done. So I was lucky enough to have some coaching when I think I was 39 at the time. And my coach said to me, I think you'd make a good coach. And I honestly don't think I ever would have come to that had she not said that. And so it kind of planted a seed, and I went off and I did lots of research and I thought, God, actually that sounds so fascinating. I think, that would be a good match to what I'm good at and the things I'm interested in. So I started training as a coach a couple of years ago and I qualified last year. And what I found definitely for myself and with a lot of my clients is that around the age of 40 is such a natural point to kind of pause and reassess and think, I've done 20 years of my career. What do I want out of the next 20? I've still got quite a lot of my career left. What am I going to do with that? What changes do I need to make? So that was sort of what I would call my 2020 shift. And now I help other people find what theirs is as well.
So before we go into the whole age thing, because I have never had any coaching in my life. Jimmy's had loads of it and I've not had any, but what exactly is a coach? What does a coach do and how do they help people?
I think that's a really great question because I think a lot of people aren't sure and there's some confusion between coaching and mentoring. So in a nutshell, coaching is going from where you are now to where you want to be. Very future focused and very goals focused. What sets it apart from counselling is that counselling will look back into the past, whereas coaching looks to the future. And the main difference between coaching and mentoring is that coaching is very non-directive. So you'll never hear, well, you usually wouldn't hear a coach saying, this is my advice to you, or I think you should do this, or when I was in a similar situation, this is what I did. That would be more mentoring. That's a lot more directive. So if I was coaching you, James, I would come with the belief that you have all the answers you need inside you. You just need someone to ask you the right questions to access them.
Okay. Yeah, Jimmy's been trying that for about 25 years.
Yeah. I go into the more directive mentoring, as you sort of call it, to help tell him what to do.
It's more like dictating rather than mentoring with Jimmy.
But no, I mean, just that's great explanation of the difference between coaching, mentoring, and counselling. I swear by it in terms of the opportunity to help you. As you say, you've got the answers internally somewhere. It's how do you work with people to help uncover those answers? And certainly whether it's been parts of my life, my background, or my career, I found coaching, mentoring, or counselling to be invaluable. And apologies for getting your name wrong as well.
It's all right, everyone got it.
I agree. You were fantastic as a digital content person because you did a lot of work when we worked together to get FSS. Have I now dug myself out of the embarrassing hole that I was in?
Yeah, you've more than dug yourself out. Thanks, Jimmy.
Excellent. Yours is a great story in terms of really highlighting the work that you do, thinking about what you're doing and then making some choices and doing something completely different. I definitely admire you for that.
So why 40 then? So what's the magic number? What's your thinking there?
So I think, it's not just 40. You can need a career change or want to make career changes at any point. But I think there's definitely something quite special around 40. So you've done your first 20 years-ish of your career, got so much brilliant experience, like life experience and career experience behind you. And I think you know yourself so much better than at 20. We often fall into things straight after uni or, in our early 20s. And that can actually kind of set the direction for the rest of your career. It's easy to fall into something, perhaps sleepwalk through it, not necessarily really unhappy, but not being intentional about what we're doing. So I think when you get to 40-ish, I think that is often the time where you start to question things and think, actually, I'm not near retirement yet, but I've got like 20 odd years left. What do I need to do to make this more meaningful so I have more purpose, so it's more intentional? And I think that can apply to anyone. I think it's particularly relevant for parents because I think typically you might have kids in your 30s. It varies, but that's quite a common age to have kids. And I think coming out the other side of that in your 40s, you've got a bit more time as your kids get older, you've got a bit more energy, probably quite time poor. So you want to make sure that what you are doing with your time is worthwhile and something that actually makes you happy and fulfills you.
Just to pick up though, Jess, I think the interesting thing for me was that the kind of the process and the intentional thought and actually using coaching as one of the opportunities to go through that thought process. I mean, you're right, 40 is a big milestone and a great point in your life career to be thinking about that. But the same sort of process that you're going to talk through and the same way of thinking and the same use of coaching does apply to various other ages, doesn't it really?
It definitely does. And I've coached people, in their 20s all the way up to in their 60s. So yeah, you're right. I think anyone would benefit from coaching as long as you're sort of committed to the process and you're going to put stuff into it.
Yeah. When I was 40, I took voluntary redundancy at exactly the same time as my wife gave birth to my youngest daughter. So I had the joy of signing on at the dole office whilst my wife was not working and I had a small child. So it was a bit stressful.
And we say, Jess, that James is the clever one out of the two of us. But that proves you never used coaching, did you, James?
No, I didn't. Yeah, maybe I should have done. But you're right. And you get to that point where you think, crikey, 20 years of this, is that all it is? And you need to have a rethink. Mm-hmm. And I had to rethink and it helped me no end. But maybe that was a bit of a extreme way of going about it.
When you look back, James, do you regret that decision?
Oh, no, not at all. No, because, well, I went self-employed for a little while and I worked for the local council. I remember sitting there talking to a guy who'd been working for Nottingham City Council and he'd been working there since he left university. So he'd been there 20 odd years. And he said to me, it's really surprising. I've been here 20 years, but when I look back, it didn't seem that long at all. And he'd been sitting at the same desk for 20 years. And to your point about intentionality, probably is still sitting there. Yeah, so I do think you need to take a grip of the situation and understand what you're doing and, drive your own life.
That's one of the key things for me is it's making intentional decisions, because often people just, like I said, sleepwalk through things. Doesn't mean that it's wrong for him to sit in that desk for 20 years or the next 20 years, but be intentional about it.
Just going to say exactly that, Jimmy. Doesn't mean that he's doing the wrong thing, but has he stopped to think about it and actively choose it? That's the thing.
Yeah, for me, actually, after going self-employed for a couple of years, I actually came to the conclusion that I preferred doing what I was doing as an employee and went back to doing it, but it was intentional. So I think it's a very good point.
Just on the point about 40, I absolutely agree in one sense. But for me, my career crossroads was actually in my early 30s. And I had worked for one company from leaving school till I was working in gambling. And lots of people just stayed with the same company or stayed in the same industry. And I just thought, I don't really want to stay this. And if I don't go now, I am going to be here for the rest of my life. And that thought of doing the same sorts of things, the same companies, not really making a positive contribution towards anyone's lives or society in general. Is that it? I think the difference between what we're going to talk about today is I knew I wanted to get out, but I didn't know what I wanted to go and do. So mine was more of a pushing away from something dynamic. I'm running away from it rather than I'm running to stuff. And that's why I think some of the stuff that you'll talk about can really help, Jess.
So let's just assume you were going to coach me or anybody else. How do you go about it? What are the sort of things you'd focus on, Jess?
Yeah, very good question. So for me, I think you can break it down into 3 simple steps. And those are clarity, confidence, and action. So I would say that clarity, and that's what I would work with you first on, is the biggie. That is the key that unlocks everything else. And like Jimmy just said about, I knew I wanted to leave that job in that industry, but I didn't know what I wanted. That is exactly it. And I think at 40-ish, there are a lot of should around, I think, whether it's your own shoulds or shoulds of society. And it's about breaking free of those, just thinking, it's not necessarily about climbing the ladder to the next promotion or whatever it is, just stripping everything back and figuring out what it is you actually want to do. That is the key. And that is what I would probably take you on first, because I think when you know that, it just opens all sorts of other doors that you didn't even know were there. So when I look back at myself and I think about the journey I went on, I would look at job boards for other content-y jobs and I'd be like, oh yeah, I could do that. Oh yeah, I could probably do that. Yeah, but I just wasn't excited. I was like, it was just all I knew. And I think that is quite a common theme I've seen with my coachees and my friends and myself. You know what you know, and you don't know what else you could do until you start to explore it.
Could you expand on something you said? So you said there are a lot of shoulds. What do you mean by that?
I guess I mean things like I should have a stable job because I've got a family to support, or I should be at a higher level than I am.
Somebody should have told me that.
Yeah. And I think it can be internal shoulds. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, don't we? And I think it could also be things from outside. I think, you've done a decent amount of your career by 40, haven't you? There's potentially some sort of outside pressure about, and I guess this comes into how you define success, but am I earning enough? Should I be earning more? And I just think it's about stripping all that back, like I said, and just thinking, well, get rid of that for a minute. When you get rid of all that, what is at the core of what you actually want?
But it's about other people's expectations rather than your own. Is that the point you're making?
I think it can be both. I think other people's expectations does play a part, even like, what your parents think or your partner or what you think your friends think, that kind of thing. I think that can come into it as well. So I think there's a lot of sort of honesty in this part of the process about just being being honest with yourself about what you do want and what you don't want, and what ultimately is going to make you happy.
So how do you go about working out that clarity with people? What are there ways of doing it, or key questions you have to ask yourself?
Yes, there are various different ways of doing it. And I think it all depends on the person and their situation and what works best for them. But I think we often look at values at this point. And I know you've recently done an episode on values. And I have to say, of all the things I do with my coachees, values is the one that has the most impact. You know, people, when you've gone through the exercise to figure out what their values are, wow, yes, of course, that's why I'm really unhappy in my job now, because, you know, whatever reason. And that's why when I look back at my favourite point of my career, that's why, because of my value of freedom or, you know, recognition or whatever it is. So I would say the values is a huge part of this bit of the process.
Now you said that, Jess, just back to my midlife example of changing from gambling into something else. That was one of my values, having a positive impact on people's lives. And that was not what I was doing in that sort of industry and that sort of job. So yeah, you can see the importance of values as we discussed in the previous episode we did on values, they can make everything feel slightly off for you, and you can't quite put your finger on it until you work through those. What else do you talk about or think about in terms of clarity? So there's values. What else?
I would say strengths is another one. And it's a squiggly careers term, this one I'm about to talk about, which is super strength. So we've all got things we're good at, but you can be good at something and not really enjoy it. Like I would say I'm quite organised and I can project manage, but I just don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I find it stressful and a bit boring. So that might be a strength, but it's not a super strength. So a super strength will be something that you are good at and you love doing. So I would say that is another part of the process that's really useful as well.
I think the point about super strength is a really good thing, because you're into, well, what do you value and what are you good at that you enjoy doing? And all of a sudden you start to, well, as you say, develop some clarity, don't you? Yeah. So I think that's, I can see the power in that. Anything else that you'd add to the clarity question?
I think there's definitely something around defining your must-haves and your non-negotiables, because probably what was important to me in my 20s and what's important to me now, very different. So, you know, one of the reasons that I left my corporate job to go all in on my coaching business was non-negotiable for me is I want to choose when and where I work. And obviously a lot of organisations require you to be in the office a certain amount of days a week and work certain hours. And for me, that's a non-negotiable. Like that freedom and that flexibility for me, that is like, I have to have that. So that is another way of getting clarity on, you know, what you are willing to compromise on and what you're not.
The show you're listening to right now brings you insights to help you improve performance and enjoyment of work.
It takes a long time to produce, but we think it's well worth it. It's all in the name of helping you getting the job done well.
All we ask in return is that you share the link to this show with someone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, click on follow the show wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
I think the key point is you won't get what you want if you don't know what you want.
That's it. And I think that,
you
know, it's part of the shit that we were talking about is you almost feel by 40 you should have it all figured out. So I wonder if there's like a little bit of kind of shame around that for some people. You know, like I shouldn't need help. I should know this. You know, I'm a grown up. But I don't believe that at all. I think there's no harm in asking for a bit of help. And I think I personally don't think you can get these answers on your own. I just don't think we're capable of that. I think you need that person there sort of holding up a mirror, just being impartial and asking you things that you'd never ask yourself.
But the other thing that coaching does is it takes you into a slightly more uncomfortable zone potentially.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking, what's my wish list of things or what's my values or whatever it is, you'll come up with a list. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but quite often a coach will just push you into that, you know, that extra 20%, that extra slightly out of your comfort zone. And then that can unlock stuff that you just, like say, you wouldn't have found yourself. So that's the stuff around clarity. That's the first step. What's the second step? Did you say confidence?
Yeah, confidence. And this is also so important because we know that most people would say, at least sometimes, they struggle with confidence. So the confidence piece is about building that foundation to kind of support you in whatever it is that's going to come next. What I found quite fascinating, what's helped my confidence, is transferable skills. By the time you're 40, you've got a lot of amazing experience under your belt. Don't underestimate how many transferable skills you will have to take you into whatever comes next. So for me, like on paper, content and coaching are like completely different. But I have been so pleasantly surprised about how many transferable skills I am using from my content days now. So things like I can build my own website because I've done that in the past. I'm relatively comfortable writing social media posts and marketing materials and that kind of thing. And I didn't realize that was going to happen when I started out on this journey. I thought it was going to be a complete start from scratch, go back to the beginning. But I don't think it really ever is, to be honest. I think there's always things, strength and experience and skills that we can bring with us.
You wouldn't necessarily say that digital content expert into coach is the logical step, but you've not only done coaching, you're also now highly qualified as a coach, aren't you? So you've got quite a lot of experience of testing out those skills, both in terms of the formal qualifications and the practical coaching.
Yeah, that's it. So when I was deciding what coaching qualification to do, I decided to go for the highest possible one you could ever do, which is like a master's level qualification. And because I know my values, I know that is my value of integrity. If I'm coaching people and it is a career change for me, I want to feel confident and comfortable that I'm offering people the best experience possible. And I've got the most rigorous training possible.
But in doing that, taking it to the highest level, you really teased out those transferable skills. It's something that we often underestimate. You know, it's applicable to so many different other roles, other industries, other organizations. So what else do you do to improve your confidence?
So we will very often do some work on beliefs. So the first part would be identifying limiting beliefs that hold us back. We all have them.
Yeah.
We all have them. And it's about, well, first of all, identifying that something is a belief, not a fact. So one of my limiting beliefs would be something around numbers. So I'm not good with numbers, but I know now that that's not a fact. It's a belief. And even just identifying it as a belief, not a fact, takes the power out of it in a way. And then it means it's something I can work on. So coaching is a lot about flipping limiting beliefs into more positive, empowering beliefs that are going to serve you and help you with whatever you want to do next. Does that bring up anything for you?
Funny enough, I did work on this years ago. And what I discovered was that some of the limiting beliefs I have come from when I was very young. So I built them up. So things like, the classic one I have is I value independence. So I want a lot of autonomy in my work, and that's been a consistent theme. And I want independence, and that's really important. That comes from when I was younger, from a very young age. Independence was something that was rewarded and people told me was really good. The way that limits me is as I've got older, my ability to ask for help or accept help is really low. I never think about, do I really need help, or I ask for help, but also I don't think about the impact that my refusal to let anyone help, what that has on them as well.
Puts me in mind of a client I had a while back who had a limiting belief that, he said, I'm not a good leader. And he was in a leadership position. He felt like he wasn't a good leader. So I asked him, is that a fact or is it a belief? He was like, well, I suppose it's a belief. Yeah. And then I asked him what evidence he had of that belief being true. And he sort of didn't really have much when he really thought about it. Like there wasn't really much he could come up with. I also asked him, who gave you that belief? And when you ask people that, often the answer is me. Like, I gave myself that belief. And like you say, Jimmy, it's so often something from childhood that you hold on to as still being true, even as a grown adult, and you don't even realize you're doing it. And then, so yeah, this particular leader, he had given himself this belief. And I asked him, well, are you always right? And he said, well, no. obviously not. No one is. And then we kind of flipped it, and he found loads of examples of where he had been a good leader, lots of different scenarios. And he really then began to see that he'd just created this myth, basically, in his own head, and had just been carrying around quite a heavy burden around. And when he really sort of picked it apart, he found there wasn't really anything to it. And in fact, he described it as almost like a set of scales, like balancing scales, where he's like, I've got these negative beliefs about myself, but when I look at all the positive things I know I've done and the good feedback I've had, I can see they vastly outweigh the negative things I think about myself. So that really empowered him, actually, in his leadership position.
But then presumably the very process of eliciting those limiting beliefs, you can then just start to turn those on their heads.
In my example, James, because I'm conscious, I ask for help. I think about it and my first reaction was wrong, or actually I'm struggling with something at the moment. I do need to ask for help. So just the awareness of something like that is very helpful, I've found.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And the fact that you're so aware of it and you actively work to sort of combat it, by doing the opposite. But actually that then does serve you, and it does help you and the people around you.
So we've talked about transferable skills and we've talked about limiting beliefs. Is there anything else that you think is worth highlighting when it comes down to confidence?
I think often people are scared for one reason or another. I think there's some fear there, and that can manifest itself in all different kind of ways, can't it? So it could be fear of failure, and that would certainly be one of mine, like fear of failure and sort of linked to perfectionism. Fear of, if I delve into this, am I going to have to rip everything up, chuck it all away and start from scratch? And I would say to that, no, definitely not unless you want to anyway. Fear of financial, of money as well. And if I do want to make changes to my career, am I going to have to take a massive pay cut and go back to the beginning and retrain? So I think there's a lot around realizing what your specific fears and anxieties are, and then kind of addressing them and rewiring your mindset.
And how do you get people to face into those fears? How do you do that?
It depends on the person, depends what I know will work for them, how much challenge I think that they would respond well to, or does it need to be a bit more gentle, or whatever it is. I think it's about asking lots of questions and kind of peeling the layers back and encouraging people when they've given an answer to sort of go the next step deeper, like peel back another layer. Okay, so what does that mean, or what's the impact of that? And if you do that, sooner or later you will come to what that fear actually is. And then you can start to explore a little bit and see that, yes, it's valid, not to like dismiss it or chuck it out or anything like that. But now you know what the specific fear is, you can then start to deal with it. And there's different things we can do, but I guess it would depend on the person.
Ultimately, fear can paralyze people in terms of making decisions and moving forward with their life. But one of the things I always think is interesting is if you've done the goals, the clarity, what you're aiming for, and then you balance that up against the fear they have. When you get that clarity and that desire, back to my point about push versus pull, if you've got some pull from something that you want to go and do, that also can help overcome the fears, because in order to do X, I'm going to have to get over this fear.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I read something the other day which said confidence doesn't come before making a decision, it comes afterwards. So if you need to make a decision and trust that the confidence will follow, because if you wait around for the confidence to come, you might never do anything.
My experience is never quite as bad as you think it's going to be.
Yep, agree.
So there you go. So we've got clarity and confidence. What's the next bit then?
So the final step would be action. Something I hear people say they're not sure about having coaching is they think they'd have a great time doing it and they would learn a lot, but they would worry that it would all be lovely in the moment, but that they wouldn't then have anything to take with them. So the plan will always be realistic and it will always be in manageable small steps. It's got to be something that the person is like completely comfortable with doing and actually they're excited about doing. It's got to be something they really want to do. It will be realistic. It won't be vague visions or sort of intangible approaches. It's basically your strategy and plan to take with you into the future.
But the key point here is these actions are things that if I was having the coaching, I have agreed to myself. It's not like some stupid stretch goal that's been passed down from on high. It's something that I commit to myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think one of the things you said, Jess, which resonates with me, is the stuff that you really want to do. Because I think sometimes you're writing out a plan and you know full well you're not going to do the actions that you're writing down. You've got no intention, no interest, no way of, but you're doing it because you're going through the motions. I think particularly on this is about your plan. It's not about anyone else's. So it's really important to have stuff that you know that you're going to do. Doesn't mean that it's easy or that it's comfortable doing it, but you still have to look yourself in the eye and say, am I going to really do these things or not?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not a box ticking exercise that someone's made you do. This is stuff that you really want to do for yourself to basically have a happier and more fulfilled life. Because it is about life, not just career. You know, our careers are a part of our lives, but, you know, we're all humans. There's so much more to us than our job, isn't there? So, you know, I don't think I've ever coached anyone where they've not made changes to their lives as well as their career as a result of the coaching.
Fascinating. So we've talked about this at age 40, but presumably this applies just as much at any other sort of crossroads time in your life.
Yeah, I think so. Like Jimmy said, you know, for him, it was his early 30s, other people in their 50s, people coming up to retirement and they want to design an intentional retirement. It can happen at any point, really. I find the 40 point is really like a magical time where there's just so much potential to make changes to your life, to make it more intentional and just to make you happier, basically, at the end of the day. Because I think that's all we want, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for you to branch out and make millions. Coaching people who are about 55 would be my personal take on it. But,
yeah, I think that's an interesting point, James, because I'm going to raise the same thing. And it might be because of the age that James and I are, and therefore a lot of the people we know are similar ages. But I think the working world is changing quite a lot. So people now in their 50s have often a lot more freedom and there's a lot more choice and there's a lot more different things that you can do. It's a lot easier to set up your own business. It's a lot easier to go off and help other organizations. And it's a lot easier to get educated and to change your work. So I think there are a lot of people in their 50s that are making those similar career choices. But I think the interesting thing is it happened to me in my 30s and my 50s. James has done his 40s and his 50s. You've done your 40s. But the same process of getting clarity around things, having the confidence to act and then having a clear action plan, I think that process that you've described is equally applicable whether you're thinking about it in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Well, normally at this point, I think we should have a summary, but I think Jimmy's taking the win from my sales. Yeah.
Sorry,
again.
James, I know you do like to finish off with your summary of of what you just heard, and I've just
a little bit of clarity.
Stole your march, mate. Stole your march.
Yeah, never mind. So thank you very much for talking to Jess. If anybody wants to contact you or talk to you, how should they go about doing that?
Best way would probably be to visit my website, which is www.2020coaching.co.uk. 2020 coaching is spelled out all one word. That's probably the best way.
We will put a link in the website as well if anybody's interested. Yeah, or presumably contact you via LinkedIn, which is a bit ubiquitous.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Jess Spiers, Spiers, often misspelled.
Not Spiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, mispronounced.
Yeah. You just had to bring that up, didn't you, James? You just couldn't let it lie. You had to make me feel bad again.
I'm still smarting about the summary.
Yeah.
Super.
But no, thank you, Jess, for joining us. Hopefully people have found that really useful. And we all face career crossroads at various times. And personally, I'd really recommend getting some coaching to help you through that process. So, have a look at Jess's website. Check it out.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers now. We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
from purpose to corporate jargon,
but always focused on one thing, getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
if your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiraling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com
or James@ajobdonewell.com.